What if the biggest obstacle between you and financial abundance is not the economy, your circumstances, your background, or even your current bank account? What if the true barrier is an assumption so familiar, so deeply rooted, that you rarely notice it, an assumption about money, an assumption about success, an assumption about what is possible for you? Most people spend their lives trying to change their financial reality while continuing to think from the same state of lack that created it. They hope for abundance while expecting scarcity. They dream of prosperity while preparing for disappointment. They desire wealth, yet secretly believe it belongs to someone else. And because assumptions shape perception, they continue experiencing the results of those assumptions. But there is a powerful truth that has transformed the lives of countless people. Your outer world often reflects the state you consistently occupy within. If you continually identify with lack, you will notice more reasons to feel limited. If you continually identify with struggle, you will notice more evidence of struggle. But if you begin identifying with abundance, possibility, and prosperity, your relationship with life begins to change. This does not mean pretending. It does not mean ignoring reality. It means understanding that every transformation begins within before it appears without. Every great achievement begins as an idea. Every successful business begins as a vision. Every financial breakthrough begins with a change in thinking. Before money can become a reality in your experience, abundance must become natural in your consciousness. The goal is not simply to acquire more money. The goal is to become the version of yourself who naturally expects abundance. A person who sees opportunity where others see limitation. A person who feels secure even before visible proof appears. A person who understands that prosperity begins as an inner state before it becomes an outer condition. Today, we are going to explore how assumptions influence financial experiences, why your inner conversations matter, and how cultivating the feeling of already being prosperous can transform the way you move through life. So take a deep breath. Release every belief that tells you abundance is far away. Release every story that says prosperity is reserved for others. And prepare to discover how changing one assumption can begin changing everything. One of the most important principles in the law of assumption is learning to assume that you are already the person you desire to become. When it comes to money, this means moving beyond the constant awareness of lack and beginning to identify with prosperity. Most people spend their lives waiting for financial abundance before they allow themselves to feel prosperous. They tell themselves, when I have more money, then I will feel secure. When I reach a certain income, then I will feel successful. When my financial situation improves, then I will finally relax. In doing so, they place prosperity in the future and continue living emotionally in the state of not having. The challenge is that your dominant state of mind often influences how you experience life. If you continually think, feel, and speak from a place of lack, you reinforce the idea that abundance is distant. Every day becomes another reminder that you are still waiting. Every financial challenge becomes evidence that prosperity has not arrived. Without realizing it, you become more familiar with scarcity than abundance. To assume you are already prosperous does not mean pretending that your current circumstances do not exist. It does not mean ignoring responsibilities, debts, or practical realities. Rather, it means refusing to let those circumstances define your identity. It means understanding that your current financial condition is temporary, while your inner state has the power to influence your future experiences. Think about the difference between a person who feels prosperous and a person who feels poor. The prosperous person may not necessarily have millions of dollars. Prosperity begins as a mindset before it becomes a material condition. A prosperous person expects opportunities. They believe growth is possible. They focus on possibilities rather than limitations. They carry themselves with confidence because they are not constantly defining themselves by what they currently lack. By contrast, a person who identifies with scarcity often focuses on obstacles. They expect disappointment. They constantly worry about not having enough. Their attention remains fixed on what is missing, and this emotional focus shapes their daily experience. This is why the feeling of prosperity is so important. Ask yourself, if I were already financially free, how would I feel? Would I feel calm? Would I feel grateful? Would I feel secure? Would I feel confident about the future? Would I feel relaxed about opportunities? These feelings are not meant to be postponed until after abundance arrives. They are meant to be cultivated now. The goal is to become emotionally familiar with prosperity before you see complete evidence of it. Many people spend years rehearsing thoughts of limitation. They repeatedly tell themselves that money is hard to earn, opportunities are scarce, and financial success is reserved for others. Over time, these thoughts become assumptions. Those assumptions influence decisions, expectations, and actions. But assumptions can be changed. You can begin assuming that opportunities are expanding. You can begin assuming that new sources of abundance are available. You can begin assuming that you are capable of growth. You can begin assuming that prosperity belongs naturally in your life. The more often you return to these assumptions, the more natural they begin to feel. One powerful practice is gratitude. Gratitude shifts attention away from what is missing and toward what is already present. It trains the mind to recognize abundance rather than scarcity. Every day, take time to appreciate the resources, opportunities, skills, relationships, and blessings that already exist in your life. This creates an inner atmosphere of prosperity. Another powerful practice is visualization. Imagine yourself already living the life you desire. Feel the confidence, security, and freedom that would naturally accompany financial abundance. Focus less on the exact amount of money and more on the emotional experience. Allow yourself to become familiar with the feeling of already having enough. As this feeling becomes more natural, something begins to change. You stop making decisions from fear. You stop reacting to every temporary setback. You stop seeing yourself as someone who is struggling to become prosperous. Instead, you begin seeing yourself as a prosperous person who is growing into greater expressions of abundance. This shift is subtle, but it is powerful. Your expectations change. Your conversations change. Your choices change. Your awareness of opportunities changes. And gradually, your outer world begins reflecting the inner transformation that has taken place. So today, stop waiting for prosperity to give you permission to feel prosperous. Stop postponing confidence until circumstances improve. Stop defining yourself by temporary conditions. Choose a new assumption. Choose to see yourself as capable. Choose to see yourself as abundant. Choose to see yourself as someone who naturally expects growth and opportunity. Because prosperity is not merely something you acquire. Prosperity is first something you assume. And the moment you begin assuming that you are already prosperous, you start moving from the state of lack into the state of abundance, a state from which new possibilities, opportunities, and financial breakthroughs can naturally emerge. One of the most powerful influences on your financial life is something most people rarely pay attention to: the conversations taking place inside their own minds. Long before money appears in your bank account, long before opportunities arrive, and long before circumstances begin to change, there is an ongoing dialogue happening within you. This inner conversation shapes your expectations, influences your emotions, and quietly forms the assumptions from which you live. Most people are unaware of how often they speak negatively about money in their thoughts. They may not say these things aloud, but internally they repeat statements such as, money is hard to get, I never have enough, things never work out for me, other people are lucky, but I'm not, or financial freedom is probably not possible for someone like me. These thoughts may seem harmless because they happen automatically, but repeated thoughts eventually become beliefs, and beliefs influence the way you experience life. Your inner conversations act like instructions that you continually give to yourself. Every time you repeat a thought, you strengthen it. Every time you dwell on a fear, you give it more emotional energy. Every time you focus on limitation, you reinforce the feeling of limitation. Over time, these mental habits become so familiar that they feel true, even when they are simply assumptions you have accepted without question. This is why changing your inner conversations is so important. If you want a different financial experience, you must begin by changing the way you speak to yourself about money. You cannot spend all day mentally rehearsing scarcity and then expect to feel abundant. You cannot constantly imagine failure and expect to feel confident. Your dominant inner dialogue creates the emotional atmosphere in which you live. Imagine two people facing the same financial challenge. The first person constantly tells themselves, this is impossible. Nothing ever changes. I will always struggle. Their inner conversation creates discouragement and hopelessness. As a result, they are less likely to notice opportunities, less likely to take positive action, and more likely to remain trapped in the same patterns. The second person says, this challenge is temporary. Solutions exist. New opportunities can appear. I am capable of growth. They are facing the same circumstances, but their inner conversation creates a completely different state of mind. That state influences how they think, act, and respond. The difference begins within. Many people believe that outer circumstances create inner thoughts. In reality, inner thoughts often influence how outer circumstances are experienced. The stories you tell yourself become filters through which you interpret reality. This is why awareness is the first step. Begin observing your inner conversations about money. Notice how you react when bills arrive. Notice what thoughts appear when you think about wealth. Notice the phrases you repeatedly tell yourself about success and abundance. Do not judge yourself. Simply observe. Awareness gives you the power to choose differently. Once you become aware of limiting conversations, you can begin replacing them with empowering assumptions. Instead of saying, I never have enough, begin saying, I am learning to create greater abundance. Instead of saying, money is always a struggle, begin saying, opportunities are available to me. Instead of saying, nothing ever works out, begin saying, life is opening new doors for me every day. The goal is not to force yourself to believe something unrealistic. The goal is to gradually establish a new mental environment, one that supports growth rather than limitation. Consistency matters. A single positive thought will not immediately erase years of negative conditioning, but repeated assumptions create new mental pathways. The more often you return to empowering inner conversations, the more natural they become. Over time, your emotional state begins to change. You feel less fearful. You feel more hopeful. You feel more confident. You begin expecting opportunities instead of obstacles. You begin focusing on possibilities instead of limitations. This shift is powerful because your expectations influence your behavior. When you expect growth, you are more likely to recognize opportunities. When you expect abundance, you become more open to receiving it. When you expect positive outcomes, you approach life with greater confidence and creativity. Your inner conversations also affect how you view yourself. Many people secretly believe they are not worthy of prosperity. They carry feelings of inadequacy that influence every financial decision they make. By changing your inner dialogue, you begin changing your self-concept. You begin seeing yourself as capable. You begin seeing yourself as deserving of growth. You begin seeing yourself as someone who can create a different future. So today, listen carefully to the voice within. Notice the stories you are repeating. Notice the assumptions you are reinforcing. Then make a conscious decision to change the conversation. Speak to yourself from possibility rather than limitation. Speak to yourself from abundance rather than scarcity. Speak to yourself from confidence rather than fear. Because every financial transformation begins with a mental transformation. And when you change your inner conversations about money, you begin changing the assumptions that shape your experience. The words you repeatedly speak within yourself become the foundation of your future. Choose them wisely, nurture them consistently, and allow them to guide you toward greater abundance, confidence, and financial freedom. One of the most powerful principles of the law of assumption is learning to live from the end rather than constantly living in the desire. Most people spend their lives wanting. They want more money, more opportunities, more success, and greater freedom. There is nothing wrong with desire itself. Desire can inspire growth and encourage us to expand beyond our current limitations. The problem begins when a person becomes emotionally attached to the state of wanting. They think about what they desire every day, but they continue experiencing it as something separate from themselves. They keep reminding themselves that it has not yet arrived. Without realizing it, they become experts at wanting instead of becoming. Every day they say, I want more money. Every day they think, I hope abundance comes. Every day they wonder when financial freedom will arrive. And every one of those thoughts reinforces the same message. I do not have it yet. The law of assumption teaches a different approach. Instead of living in the desire, you learn to live from the fulfillment of the desire. Instead of focusing on the absence of what you want, you focus on the emotional state you would naturally experience if your goal were already achieved. This is a profound shift because it changes the way you relate to your future. Most people believe that money will create confidence. They believe success will create peace. They believe abundance will create security. But what if those feelings could be cultivated before the physical evidence appears? Imagine for a moment that you already possess the financial freedom you desire. Imagine that every concern about money has been resolved. Imagine that opportunities are flowing naturally into your life. Imagine that you feel secure, supported, and abundant. Now ask yourself a simple question: how would I feel? Would I feel relaxed? Would I feel grateful? Would I feel confident? Would I feel optimistic about the future? Would I feel free from constant worry? These feelings are the true essence of the desire. Most people think they want money, but what they are really seeking is the feeling they believe money will provide. They seek security, freedom, peace, confidence, and opportunity. The mistake is postponing those emotions until some future event occurs. Living from the end means allowing yourself to experience those emotions now. This does not mean pretending your circumstances do not exist. It does not mean ignoring responsibilities or denying reality. Instead, it means choosing not to let your current circumstances dictate your emotional state. Many people allow their bank account to determine their confidence. They allow temporary setbacks to determine their sense of worth. They allow external conditions to control their inner world. But when you live from the end, your inner state becomes independent of temporary appearances. You begin generating the feelings you desire from within. You stop waiting for life to give you permission to feel abundant. You choose abundance as a state of consciousness. This shift changes everything. When you feel abundant, you think differently. When you think differently, you make different decisions. When you make different decisions, you begin noticing opportunities that fear once prevented you from seeing. A person who lives in the state of lack often acts from desperation. They worry constantly. They chase every opportunity out of fear. They become emotionally attached to immediate results. Their actions are driven by anxiety. A person who lives from the end acts differently. They still take action. They still pursue goals. They still work toward growth. But their actions come from confidence rather than fear. They move with certainty rather than desperation. They trust rather than force. This state creates a completely different experience of life. One of the simplest ways to practice living from the end is through imagination. Spend a few moments each day imagining yourself already experiencing the financial freedom you desire. Do not focus on the process of getting there. Focus on the feeling of already being there. Feel the gratitude. Feel the relief. Feel the confidence. Feel the freedom. Allow these emotions to become familiar. The more familiar they become, the more natural they feel. The more natural they feel, the more they begin influencing your assumptions about what is possible. Over time, your identity starts to shift. You stop identifying as someone who is struggling to become abundant. You begin identifying as someone who naturally expects abundance. This is the power of living from the end. It moves you from longing to embodying. It moves you from waiting to becoming. It moves you from hoping to assuming. So today, stop living in the desire. Stop constantly reminding yourself of what is missing. Stop postponing your peace until some future moment arrives. Choose to live from the fulfillment of your vision. Choose to feel abundant now. Choose to feel secure now. Choose to feel grateful now. Because the moment you stop identifying with the desire and start identifying with its fulfillment, you begin aligning yourself with a completely different reality. And often, that inner shift becomes the foundation upon which outer transformation is built. One of the greatest reasons people fail to experience transformation is not because they choose the wrong assumption, but because they abandon the right assumption too soon. Many people become excited when they first learn that their assumptions influence their experience. They begin thinking differently. They start imagining a better future. They adopt a new belief about abundance, success, or financial freedom. But after a few days or weeks, they look at their circumstances and become discouraged. When they do not see immediate evidence, they return to doubt. They return to fear. They return to the very assumptions they were trying to leave behind. This is why persistence is so important. An assumption becomes powerful through consistency. A single positive thought has little effect if it is followed by days of worry and contradiction. A new belief cannot take root if it is constantly uprooted by fear. Just as a seed requires time to grow, a new assumption requires time to become established in your consciousness. Most people are conditioned to believe only what they can see. They trust visible evidence more than inner conviction. If their bank account does not change immediately, they assume nothing is happening. If opportunities do not appear right away, they assume the process is not working. If circumstances remain the same for a period of time, they conclude that their efforts have failed. But appearances are not always reliable indicators of progress. Many important changes happen beneath the surface before they become visible. A seed develops roots before it breaks through the soil. A building requires a foundation before it rises into view. In the same way, inner transformation often occurs before outer circumstances begin to reflect it. When you adopt a new assumption about money, abundance, or success, your first responsibility is not to monitor results. Your first responsibility is to remain faithful to the assumption. This means continuing to think from abundance even when circumstances seem limited. It means continuing to expect opportunity even when evidence appears scarce. It means continuing to identify with prosperity even when temporary challenges arise. Most people allow circumstances to dictate their assumptions. When things go well, they feel positive. When things become difficult, they feel discouraged. Their state constantly changes because it is dependent upon external conditions. Persistence requires a different approach. Instead of allowing circumstances to control your state, you choose your state regardless of circumstances. You decide who you are before evidence appears. You decide what you believe before results arrive. You decide what is possible before the world confirms it. This does not mean denying reality. It means refusing to make temporary conditions your permanent identity. Imagine a person who has decided to assume abundance. For a period of time, nothing appears different externally. Bills still arrive, responsibilities still exist, challenges still appear. The temptation is to say, nothing is changing. But the person who persists understands something important. The goal is not to react to appearances. The goal is to remain aligned with the desired state. Every time they return to the feeling of abundance, they strengthen the assumption. Every time they choose confidence over fear, they reinforce the new identity. Every time they reject the impulse to return to scarcity thinking, they deepen the new mental pattern. Persistence is not about forcing results. It is about maintaining consistency. Many people believe that faith means never having doubts. In reality, faith often means continuing despite doubt. It means choosing your assumption again and again until it becomes natural. There will be moments when fear appears. There will be moments when circumstances challenge your belief. There will be moments when impatience tempts you to give up. These moments are not signs of failure. They are opportunities to strengthen your persistence. Each time you remain faithful to your chosen assumption, you build greater confidence in it. Over time, what once felt unnatural begins to feel normal. What once felt like hope becomes expectation. What once felt like imagination becomes identity. This is where real change begins. A new identity creates new decisions. New decisions create new behaviors. New behaviors create new opportunities. And new opportunities often lead to new results. But none of this happens without persistence. You cannot dig up a seed every day to check if it is growing. You cannot constantly question the process and expect peace. You must allow time for growth. You must allow space for development. You must trust what is taking place beneath the surface. So today, make a decision to persist. Do not let temporary circumstances define your future. Do not allow delays to convince you that nothing is happening. Do not abandon your assumption because results are not immediate. Instead, remain faithful to the state you have chosen. Think from abundance. Feel from abundance. Expect from abundance. Return to that state whenever fear appears, because persistence is what transforms an idea into a belief into an identity, and an identity into an experience. And when you persist in the assumption, regardless of circumstances, you stop being controlled by appearances and begin creating a new reality from within. One of the most powerful shifts a person can make is moving from merely wanting abundance to identifying as an abundant person. Most people approach wealth from the perspective of desire. They want more money, more opportunities, and greater financial freedom. Yet, despite these desires, they continue seeing themselves through the lens of limitation. They think of themselves as someone who is trying to become prosperous rather than someone who is already aligned with prosperity. As long as this gap exists, they remain emotionally attached to the experience of not having. The truth is that every lasting transformation begins with identity. Your identity influences your thoughts, your expectations, your habits, and your actions. It determines how you respond to opportunities and challenges. If you identify as someone who is constantly struggling, you will naturally think, feel, and behave in ways that reinforce that identity. If you identify as someone who is capable, resourceful, and abundant, your actions will begin reflecting those assumptions. This is why abundance must become more than a goal. It must become a self-concept. Most people believe that once they acquire money, they will become confident. They believe that once they achieve financial success, they will feel secure. They assume that abundance creates identity. But in many cases, identity comes first. The way you see yourself influences what you believe is possible. It affects how you use your talents, how you respond to setbacks, and how willing you are to recognize opportunities. Think about someone who truly identifies with abundance. Such a person is not necessarily defined by the amount of money they possess. Rather, they possess an inner certainty that opportunities exist. They trust their ability to learn, adapt, and grow. They do not constantly live in fear of lack because their sense of worth is not dependent upon temporary circumstances. By contrast, a person who identifies with scarcity may continue feeling limited even when opportunities appear. They may doubt themselves. They may expect failure. They may unconsciously reject success because it conflicts with the identity they have accepted. This demonstrates an important principle: people often act in harmony with who they believe they are. If you believe you are unworthy of abundance, you may sabotage opportunities without realizing it. If you believe you are destined to struggle, you may unconsciously create patterns that reinforce struggle. If you believe prosperity belongs naturally in your life, you become more open to receiving, recognizing, and acting upon opportunities. Changing identity begins with awareness. Pay attention to the labels you attach to yourself. Do you see yourself as someone who is always struggling financially? Do you describe yourself as unlucky? Do you believe success comes easily for others but not for you? These hidden beliefs shape your experience far more than you may realize. Once you become aware of these limiting identities, you can begin replacing them. Instead of identifying as someone who lacks, begin identifying as someone who is growing. Instead of seeing yourself as limited, begin seeing yourself as capable. Instead of viewing yourself as powerless, begin viewing yourself as resourceful. The goal is not to create an unrealistic fantasy. The goal is to establish an identity that supports expansion rather than limitation. One of the most effective ways to strengthen a new identity is through repetition. Repeated thoughts become familiar. Familiar thoughts become beliefs. Beliefs become assumptions. Assumptions become part of your identity. Every day, remind yourself of who you are becoming. See yourself as a person who naturally expects opportunities. See yourself as someone who manages resources wisely. See yourself as someone who creates value and attracts growth. See yourself as someone who is aligned with abundance. Over time, these assumptions begin influencing your behavior. You start making decisions from confidence instead of fear. You begin focusing on possibilities instead of obstacles. You become more willing to take constructive action. You become more resilient when challenges arise. This is important because abundance is not merely about receiving more. It is also about becoming more. It is about expanding your mindset, developing your abilities, and cultivating a greater sense of possibility. As your identity changes, your relationship with money changes. You stop seeing abundance as something outside of you. You stop chasing it from a state of desperation. You stop believing that your worth depends on financial outcomes. Instead, you begin embodying the qualities associated with prosperity. You carry yourself differently. You think differently. You act differently. And because you act differently, your experiences begin changing as well. So today, make a decision to let abundance become your new identity. Stop defining yourself by past limitations. Stop identifying with temporary circumstances. Stop carrying old assumptions that no longer serve your growth. Choose a new self concept. Choose to see yourself as capable, worthy, resourceful, and abundant. Because lasting financial transformation is not simply about changing what you have, it is about changing who you believe yourself to be. And when abundance becomes your identity rather than merely your desire, you begin moving through life with a confidence, expectation, and openness that naturally supports greater prosperity and opportunity. One of the most profound truths about abundance is that wealth is created in consciousness before it is expressed in circumstances. Most people believe that money exists only in the external world. They look at bank accounts, investments, jobs, and opportunities and assume these are the true sources of prosperity. While these things certainly play a role in financial life, they are often the visible effects of something deeper. Before abundance becomes an outer experience, it usually begins as an inner state. Every achievement starts as an idea before it becomes a reality. Every invention exists in the imagination before it appears in the world. Every successful business begins as a vision before it becomes a company. In the same way, financial abundance often begins with a shift in consciousness before it becomes visible in material form. Many people focus entirely on changing external conditions while neglecting their inner world. They want different results, but they continue entertaining the same fears, the same doubts, and the same assumptions. They desire abundance, yet they constantly think about lack. They hope for financial freedom, yet they repeatedly imagine limitation. As a result, their inner state remains inconsistent with the experience they seek. The law of assumption teaches that consciousness is the foundation from which experience grows. Your dominant thoughts, feelings, and assumptions influence the way you perceive life. They affect your expectations, your decisions, and your willingness to recognize opportunities. In this sense, consciousness acts as the creative center from which future experiences emerge. Consider two individuals who are facing similar circumstances. One person constantly focuses on obstacles. They believe opportunities are scarce. They expect disappointment. They assume that success is difficult to attain. Their consciousness is filled with limitation, and this influences every choice they make. The other person chooses a different perspective. They focus on possibility. They assume growth is available. They expect opportunities to appear. They maintain a sense of confidence even when circumstances are challenging. As a result, they approach life differently. They notice possibilities that others overlook. They take action when opportunities arise. Their consciousness creates a completely different experience of reality. This is why wealth cannot be measured solely by external possessions. There are people who possess significant resources yet remain trapped in fear and scarcity. They constantly worry about loss. They never feel secure. They live emotionally from a state of lack despite having material abundance. Conversely, there are people who begin cultivating an abundant consciousness long before their financial situation changes. They develop gratitude. They develop confidence. They develop the expectation of growth. Over time, this inner transformation influences the way they think, act, and respond to life. Wealth consciousness is not about pretending to be rich. It is about developing a mindset that aligns with abundance. It is about seeing possibilities instead of limitations. It is about focusing on creation rather than fear. It is about expecting growth instead of constantly anticipating setbacks. One powerful way to cultivate wealth consciousness is through gratitude. Gratitude shifts your attention away from what is missing and toward what is already present. It trains the mind to recognize abundance rather than scarcity. The more you appreciate what you already have, the easier it becomes to perceive new opportunities for growth. Another important practice is imagination. Spend time imagining yourself already living in financial freedom. Feel the emotions associated with abundance. Feel the confidence. Feel the peace. Feel the security. Allow these feelings to become familiar. The goal is not simply to think about wealth, but to become emotionally aligned with it. This alignment changes the way you move through life. You become less reactive to temporary setbacks. You stop allowing circumstances to control your emotional state. You stop identifying with limitation. Instead, you begin identifying with possibility. As this new consciousness becomes established, your expectations change, your decisions change, your actions change. And because your actions change, your results often begin changing as well. This is why consciousness is so important. Every external achievement has an internal origin. Every visible result begins with an invisible state. What appears in your life is often influenced by what you repeatedly accept within yourself. So today, remember that wealth is first created in consciousness. Do not become obsessed with appearances. Do not allow temporary conditions to define your future. Do not assume that your current circumstances represent your ultimate potential. Instead, focus on developing an abundant inner world. Cultivate gratitude. Cultivate confidence. Cultivate the expectation of growth. Cultivate the feeling of already being supported by life. Because the wealth you seek is not merely a collection of material possessions. It is a state of consciousness that influences every area of your experience. And when abundance becomes established within you, the outer world gradually begins reflecting that inner transformation. For every lasting financial change begins in the unseen realm of thought, belief, and assumption before it ever becomes visible in the world around you. As we come to the end of this message, remember this powerful truth. Every financial transformation begins with an internal transformation. Long before abundance appears in the outer world, it must first become accepted in the inner world. Most people wait for evidence before they believe. They wait for money before they feel prosperous. They wait for success before they feel successful. They wait for change before they allow themselves to think differently. But true change happens in reverse. The inner shift comes first. The assumption comes first. The feeling comes first. The belief comes first. When you consistently assume abundance, you begin thinking differently. When you think differently, you make different decisions. When you make different decisions, you notice different opportunities. And over time, those opportunities can create entirely different results. Do not allow your current circumstances to define what is possible. Do not allow temporary appearances to determine your expectations. Do not allow past experiences to become permanent assumptions. Remember that every great change in life begins as an invisible possibility before it becomes a visible reality. Your responsibility is not to force abundance. Your responsibility is not to worry constantly about outcomes. Your responsibility is to cultivate the state that matches the life you wish to experience. Think from abundance, feel from abundance, expect from abundance, live from abundance. Allow prosperity to become natural within you. Because when abundance becomes your dominant assumption, you stop identifying with limitation. You stop expecting struggle. You stop living in the emotional state of lack. And you begin aligning yourself with a completely different experience of life. Trust the process. Remain faithful to your vision. Persist in the assumption. And allow your inner transformation to lead the way. Because the life you desire often begins the moment you stop waiting for evidence and start becoming the person who already expects it. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I hope this message has reminded you that prosperity is not simply about what exists in your bank account. It is about the assumptions you accept, the thoughts you entertain, and the identity you choose to embody every day. If this message inspired you, take a moment to reflect on one assumption about money that you are ready to change. Perhaps it is the belief that abundance is difficult. Perhaps it is the belief that opportunities are limited. Perhaps it is the belief that financial freedom belongs only to other people. Whatever it is, choose today to replace it with a new assumption, one that supports growth, possibility, and abundance. If you enjoyed this message, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who may benefit from hearing it. I would also love to hear from you in the comments. What new assumption about money are you choosing today? Your answer may encourage and inspire someone else on their own journey toward abundance. Thank you again for being here and for investing this time in your personal growth. May you think from abundance. May you act from confidence. May you expect opportunity. And may you discover that the prosperity you seek begins with the assumptions you choose to accept. Take care, stay inspired, and remember, the moment you change your assumptions, you begin changing your world. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next message.